Would you please welcome Greg Baines?
I am here as much to answer your questions as to listen, because I know that everywhere I've gone, it's been really interesting to hear issues. And while there are some common issues across the Hume electorate, everywhere I go, there are specific things and interesting issues that are good for me to understand so that I can do what I can to support you. As I said in the introduction, I've lived, because of living in Newcastle and living in Tasmania at the time I did, I've lived in two places that had to change, radically change. So in Tasmania, they had to close a paper mill, and I had to go to school with the children of the families who were employed there. These families faced an end to their livelihoods because of that. And I lived through the transition in Newcastle, where we thought the heavens were going to fall in because the steelworks were closing, but it didn't. And we muddled our way through. And Newcastle, I think, is perhaps a better place than it's ever been. The employment patterns have changed, and it's a really lovely place to live. So that has given me heart, and that kind of drives me, particularly at a time like this when so much of our country needs to transition to new ways of doing things. I'm very passionate about being part of a caring government. I think that Coalition has had a tough time. Dealing with COVID and dealing with some of the environmental issues that they've had to deal with has been tough, but I don't think they've done a good enough job. I think we've had a government that doesn't have a heart. It feels like it's a government that doesn't really care about all of its people. So what I'm proud of with Labor is that we care. We are concerned with aged care. We have strong policies around childcare as well. We proudly support Medicare, and we have you at the heart and centre of our policy, because I think government is about looking after you. I would also like, if I was successful in winning in Hume, to do politics differently, as was said in the introduction. I'd like to buy a mobile office so I can move around the electorate, because I think too often our politicians are very distant from us and they're very remote, and you might see them, if you're lucky, a couple of times a year, and the relationship is not right. I think we need politicians who serve you, who work with you and take your ideas to caucus and represent you much better in Parliament, because you pay the salaries of our politicians. So as a school teacher, having met many different kinds of people in the community, I think I'm very good at being able to communicate with a wide range of people, and I would look forward to the challenge of being elected to the seat of Hume. So thank you, and I'm really keen to hear your concerns tonight, and as I said, I'm here as much to listen as I am to, I don't want to talk at you, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Didn't use 5 minutes, so we've got extra questions I've got to read through. Penny Anthony is next, the Community Independent. Although not initially intending to run, Penny was part of 18 months of kitchen table discussions throughout Hume, talking about what people wanted to see from their elected representative. Penny was selected from 4 other nominees as their community candidate. Penny has lived, worked and played in the north and south of Hume for 30 years. She was a high school teacher for 36 years, becoming a head teacher in special education. Her priorities are for a federal IPEP, a transition to a renewable energy economy and equality in our communities. Penny Anthony.
Good evening. This is participative democracy. It's great to see it happening and to see all of these candidates and myself fronting the community to find out their concerns, to hear their questions and to answer honestly. This is what we are looking for in Australia. And this is why I stood at this election. And this is why I'm standing as an independent in this election. So I, as you heard, was selected from community groups to be the community independent candidate for Hume. I wasn't parachuted into this position by a party leader, nor did a party to whom you have to pay fees to belong decide it was going to be me or select me. And neither did I pop up my hand and say, well, what about me? I'll have a go. I was actually selected by the community. And as I've travelled up and down the community in Hume, north and south, and east and west as well, I've found that one of the main concerns is that people want transparency, accountability and integrity in their government. And that means a federal ICAC, not the one that was tried to be amended earlier last year, but one that has true teeth, that will be look at what's happened in the past as well as what's happened now. If we have a true integrity commission that really makes government accountable, that means that all those issues that stem from that, whether it's transitioning to a renewable economy, whether it's our health system, whether it's our aged care system, all of those things can be made transparent so that we know our taxpayer monies is actually going to where we need them, and that there's no lobby groups or no large donations that are making decisions on our behalf, that it is we, the community, that will make those decisions. So that is the front and centre of what I'm hearing from people, that integrity commission that lets us know that us, you, the community, are all being fairly heard, and it is people in government acting in our interest. Again, as I go up and down the community, what I'm finding is that we do really desire a renewable economy. And we all know that we need that, not just to protect our environment, to make sure our economy works within the global sphere. Our global partners, they are moving to renewable energies. And if we stick our head in the sand, we are going to miss out. Already they're talking about tariffs on our agriculture. And I represent a lot of people in our rural areas who are looking to transition to make sure that they are renewable so that they can continue to trade their agricultural products. That is really important for us as an economy. But we also know that transitioning to a renewable economy is going to help our health. We cannot afford that pollution and all of those other health costs that come with not moving to renewable energies. It is really important. But we need to make it fair for all. We are still doing some coal mining. We need to make sure the transition is fair for everybody. And that is really important to make action happen. One of the other huge things, and even today at Camden at the polling booth, and also at Barrow the other day, and in Goulburn, or was it all of them, what they are saying is that we want our representative to be on the ground, to be visible, and that's not happening at the moment. So many times I've spoken to people through email, on the phone, on the street saying, we want someone that we can talk to, that we can communicate with. We don't want to just be told every 3 years, oh, this is a guaranteed seat for Liberals, so don't bother to vote for anybody else. That is not okay. That is not representing us, the community. We want a representative who is there to talk, to communicate, and to be there for us and our democracy. It is important that we grab back our democracy, and we do that by voting for an independent who is going to truly represent you, the community, and nobody else. Thank you.
Before we go on, Christine thinks that she may not have mentioned that this event is being videoed and taped to be screened at a later date on a YouTube website. So I just need you to know that the camera is at the back in the loft. It's being recorded, and if everybody is uncomfortable with that, could they please raise their hand? No, okay, that doesn't need to be recorded, but you need to know that that's what's happening. Thank you. Thank you. Karen Stewart is representing the Greens in this electorate. A childhood in Dolan, an early adult in Sydney's eastern suburbs, and 20 years in rural and urban Canada. This man, Karen, is keenly aware of the challenges facing communities. Droughts, fires, and their hometown's flooding, intensified by climate change, have affected housing affordability, childcare costs, and insecure work for families and households. As a small business owner, parent, and volunteer, she sees the effects of lagging social and financial policies. She is determined to amplify the voices of the community and act on these issues. Karen Stewart.
Yes, so I grew up in Dubbo, out in regional central west New South Wales, and had to leave Dubbo to go to university, so moved to Sydney's eastern suburbs. Now I've settled in Camden, which is on the rural urban fringe of Sydney, so that gives me the best of both worlds. I get a farm that's less than 10 minutes away, and I get to the city in an hour, central CBD. So it's been really lovely in that regard. So as a small business owner, I understand the difficulties in trying to manage your staff and manage profit making and tax minimisation, all the things that a business owner has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I'm also proud of the small business and how they can focus so well in a community to really balance the role that they have. There's a really strong point in making sure that they are giving back to the community. And so a dollar spent in a local business goes around the community so much. And so we all need to remember that. And as we look at multinationals making enormous profits, where do those profits end up? And so I think an itty-bitty business like mine, where I can sponsor a school, a sporting team, or a local domestic violence charity, which is something that I spend a lot of time in. And so that's really important, to feel that you're a part of a community, and in a community like this you would feel that much the same. So I think that money that ends up in the Cayman Islands doesn't serve the community very, very well at all. I think we all know that. Being a mother to 4 kids, several of whom have disabilities, has made life tricky in understanding where to get those supports. And I think with full funding for the NDIS, we would understand how that benefits everybody. And we want people to understand that full funding, these are things that should have happened a long, long time ago, and we need to make sure that that's a part of going forward, so that people with disabilities understand that there is no barrier to what they can achieve. And that's been something that I've had to work hard with my kids as well, in making sure that gets addressed. Now, in terms of transparency and accountability, I think we all know that a Federal Integrity Commission is absolutely integral to the functioning of our democracy. And as Penny has mentioned, we all want one that can actually accomplish what it sets out to accomplish and address parts of government operations where we don't have the oversight or the transparency, that doesn't let us know what's happening and how to deal with it if we think that something's not going right. Now, as an accountant and as an auditor, I'm subject to enormous regulatory oversight. So it actually demeans my entire sector when the Attorney General can dismiss something raised in an audit situation. The Prime Minister listens to the claims made by the Auditor General and says, no, don't worry, nothing to see here. So what's the point of auditing then? Why do we have all this red tape surrounding all the charities and self-managed super funds that have to be audited if the government won't address the things that are raised to them? And that's taxpayer money. And I think that's something that none of us are happy with, the lack of oversight. And I think that's something that's important to me, because I've seen when it fails the detriment that it has on family life. And I was subject to some national security concerns last year in relation to conspiracy theorists and how that affected employment at Kirribilli House, directly with the Prime Minister and his wife. And so when you blow the whistle on something that you know is wrong, and the Prime Minister doesn't take notice, how do we react? How does a layperson get that information out there to ensure the safety of each of us? And I think where things are hidden, we must shine a light on those to make sure that people listen and people act. And without that oversight, we can't do that.
Thank you, Karen. If you hear a whimpering, it's because it's a beautiful dog down the front.
Sorry,
Good
still
friend.
learning.
No, just to let people know that they're not imagining things. You'll be well behaved. Our next candidate is Rebecca Thompson from One Nation. Rebecca has served in both state and federal customer service positions for more than 13 years, assisted tens of thousands navigate and understand tedious government policies and processes. She has done outreach work in the community, assisting vulnerable people access government assistance and resources. A mother of 2 young children, Rebecca is passionate about preserving the Australian way of life and Australian values for future generations. Rebecca Thompson.
Hi everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. I stand here today as a self-funded candidate because I believe Australia and Australians deserve better. For so long now, we've been represented by politicians who are completely out of touch with everyday Australians. We are viewed more as a burden than a person they were elected to represent. I've been out in the community for many months now, and Australians are struggling. The ability to live comfortably has been decreasing well before COVID and has only accelerated the issue during COVID and added many more struggles. The three key issues that I will prioritise if elected are abolishing mandates and the loopholes that come with them, lowering the cost of living and addressing the unnecessary but common issue of food insecurity, and reforming the family law system. Since starting my campaign in January, the number one issue that I'm asked about in the community is my opinion on mandates. It appears this topic is many that many do not want to acknowledge or address. Vaccine mandates have no place in a free and democratic country like Australia. When people are threatened with losing their way of survival and ability to put food on the table to feed their families, that is not a choice, and that is not democracy. There are staffing shortages in our most crucial industries, such as our hospitals, schools, supply chains, and supermarkets, soon to be within our emergency services, yet we have thousands of workers willing but unable to work. Australians have sacrificed so much over the last 2 years. We need to move past COVID and return Australians to work and allow Australia to thrive once again. Cost of living is placing a heavy burden onto many, with families having to choose between groceries and fuel. With interest rates rising and the housing crisis, Australians are being pushed into homelessness. Having spent time in the community after the recent floods, it is the help of charities and fellow Australians who are supporting others and assisting those in need, not the government. It is time for change. People want change, want to be heard, and truly represented. Our nation has been sold out since the Labor government signed the Lima Declaration under the United Nations in 1975, an agreement that started the demise of Australian manufacturing and production. Each election, the newly elected government continues to honour the agreement and continues to desecrate our nation's ability to be self-sufficient. With Australia now being in $1 trillion of debt, if we do not do something to change the direction we are headed, it will not only be my children's children, but their children paying for our government's out-of-hand spending. The major parties have had decades to improve our nation, but instead we get broken promises election after election. I will not stand here and make promises to win votes, but one promise I can make and I will keep is to be an honest voice for the Australian people on the floor of Parliament, and I will fight for what is right. Vote for change this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next candidate is Gary Dolan from UAP, United Australia Party. Gary is from Western Sydney and completed 2 trades, mechanical and electrical, and studied a part degree in maths and physics. He has built a consulting business, relocating and fitting out factories for manufacturing industries. Following a fateful fishing trip, Gary focused on intensive agriculture, pioneering techniques for producing ruddy cod and barramundi. He has produced tons of fish annually for the Sydney market for almost 20 years. Gary is a keen pilot in the aviation community. Gary Dolan.
Yes, thank you for having me today. It's good to see so many people out in our community. Shows democracy is alive and well. It's good to see. Firstly, I'd like to say, well, furthermore from the intro and shows I'm just one of you guys. I've come from the ground up. I went through school and I basically needed a job straight out of school, and I started this way, getting the trades. I've never had any really aspirations of being a politician at all. Quite frankly, if you told me 2 years ago I'd be here, I don't think I would have laughed very hard, that's for sure. I'm a believer of democracy working from the bottom up, and I think that is neglected these days. It seems to be coming from the top down, from all across the country and living the world these days. We're taking a lot of the times, taking a lot of legislation and directions from unelected officials, infiltrating into the political system, and I think that sort of it needs to stop. It needs to go back to the ground level. from you guys and take it further. Also, there's no accountability. It's been word tonight, no accountability and transparency. I'm also one of those guys who think that these guys have been getting a bit too much these days, and we've got to come back to looking at what's going on and looking through their decision making and where money's going and the like. It's all about transparency and accountability. What it comes to that, and the division amongst the people today, I think, is at its all-time greatest, I believe. The nationalism and patriotism is gone. It's all about individualism these days, and I'm a person who is a very patriotic guy, I believe, and I think this is a necessary thing to bring back. That's a hard one to address, but I think that's something that we need to do. Being as mentioned in the bio, a pilot for a number of years for the last 20 odd years, one thing that's kept me is very, very real. I've had to make a lot of big decisions very, very quickly in some cases, with very much big ramifications if I don't get it right. So with this, I've had a lot of experience in. I believe if elected, these are the sorts of things I'll be taking forward with obviously knowing that there's no one to back me up and I'll make these decisions. But furthermore, I believe giving a lot of those decisions back to you guys. That's how I see it in the electorate. We put it out there and as best as we can liaison and sure enough, we make decisions together and not just take it on themselves as such and get away. Well, realism, there's a lot of things going around today we all hear about in politics. There's a lot of policies going around, and I believe a lot of it isn't real. We've got to come back to the ground and be what's realistic for us, be realistic for our families, and be realistic for business. So realism to me is probably the key word out of everything that's said tonight. We've got to really be educated in what we do and what's going on, and know if it's going to happen as such from Australia's point of view, and if it really is the best interest for us, yourself and your family. Because it might sound good as such, but it's got to be real. It's got to be real for all of us, and it's got to work. My biggest probably point of being here, as I said, no career aspirations of being a politician, is the cost of living, and it's getting out of hand. And the United Australia Party offered a lot of, at all parties, offered a lot for the cost of living to try to attack this. Just to read out a couple of our policies, just to show that obviously you might want to question about it, is obviously we want to end the mandates. We believe in free education. We don't believe anybody should be disadvantaged leaving school, especially at the time when they need, when they're trying to start life more or less, and getting themselves home loans and the like. So we believe in free education. That also means HECS and TAFE debts to be removed or forgiven. We want to cap your home loans at 3% because we all know what's happening at the moment with the home loans being raised, and they recommend, they're saying another 4 more before the end of the year. So we're going to cap those home loans, 3% for 5 years, 20% tax concession for people outside 200 kilometres to get people outside the city, $180 raise in your pension a fortnight per person, and to cover a lot of this cost, balance the books, there's a 15% licence fee on your iron ore exports to ensure that these books are balanced and we can do this for the Australian people in the $450 billion GDP revenue that we make. Obviously there's a lot more to talk about. I have a few more to talk through as well, but my time's going around, so I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Our next candidate is Ross Seller from the Shooters Fishing Farmers Party. Ross was a corporate lawyer in Sydney for many years and has degrees in economics, law, and masters of law. He lives in the Southern Highlands raising heritage cattle and heritage poultry. He has lobbied government and for legislative changes at both federal and state level. He has a keen interest in politics, how laws are made and regulated, and how they affect us day to day. He supports how the Shooters, Farmers and Fishers Party has brought its policies in response to constituents. Ross Seller.
I should say that the heritage cattle and the heritage poultry are really made by my wife. I sort of do what she tells me to do, but I'm not really an expert in that area. Now, look, thank you for that introduction. Obviously, my background has been the lawyer in the city, although I still practice now in the Southern Highlands. Can you hear me? The party that I'm representing is called the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. Now, I've been a member of the party for a little while and only recently was asked to represent them in this electorate. The thing I think I should say initially is that it started 30 years ago with John Tingle, who was a journalist, and it only dealt at that time with firearms policies. Coincidentally, his daughter, Laura Tingle, was the young journalist on 7:30 report, Chapter 2. Now, since that time, the party expanded quite dramatically. Now, really is a service party, if you like. It deals with all the things that all political parties deal with. And it's the things that got me interested in it was the success that it had in regional New South Wales with the New South Wales Parliament. In the last elections in 2019, they won 3 seats in the lower house. They won Orange, Barwon and Murray, which collectively represented nearly 45% of the area of New South Wales. Those people, especially in Orange and Barwon, are loved by their constituents. They're loved by their constituents because they look after them. And I think there's very little doubt that they'll be re-elected next year in the next New South Wales state elections. Mr Donato, who's the member for Orange, won that seat in the by-election with the largest swing at that time that's ever happened in New South Wales electoral history. And then when the main elections came out in 2019, he won again, but with an even larger margin than he had before. So he broke 2 records. Now that doesn't happen because you're representing people who like firearms. It happens because you're there to represent people in your electorate and reflect what they want in the parliament that you're sitting in. And that's really what we're about with this seat Hume in the federal election. At the moment, we don't have any lower house seats in the federal election. The concentration of the party has been on New South Wales, and still is, and still will be. But we're now expanding into this domain. There are 3 lower house candidates at the moment. I'm one of them. And what we're trying to do really is get into the lower house of the federal parliament and represent the communities that those electorates contain. One of the things that influenced me recently was Mr Fred Chaney, who was previously a deputy leader of the Liberal Party, was in the Liberal Party from I think 1958 to about 1996. He was on the front bench of the Liberal Party federally, held various portfolios. But he said in an article in the Sydney Morning Herald recently that things have changed in the coalition. That when he was a member of the Liberal Party, the primary obligation that they had was to the electorate. If there was a need to cross the law on a conscience issue, but you really can't do that in a coalition. You never do it with the Labor Party, you still can't do it. He was very disappointed with the lack of accountability, the use of electoral money for electoral purposes. The long-term interests of the country are not taken into account when the government's making major decisions. They're held hostage to the extremes of party politics. They're all things that he said. They're all things that he felt very, very disappointed about when he looks at politics today. And that's not what we're about. We're here to offer you representation in the way that, I guess, the coalition, the Liberal Party and the Country Party in the old days used to represent electorates. That's what we want to do. It's not just talk, that's what we're already doing in New South Wales. It's what we're doing up in Orange. If you've got any friends who live in Orange, west of there, have a talk to them about our party and what they're doing for those local electorates. They're making a big difference. They're pulling in money which didn't come into those electorates before. Changes that were needed are being made, and they're not being ignored. Now, in this electorate, the odds are that the sitting members, Taylor, will be in opposition after 2 weeks' time. But that's looking at the way that things are going. If you have
Our next candidate from the Liberal Democrat Party is Joaquim de Lima. Joaquim came to Australia from Brazil when he was 7, became a citizen in 1993. He has worked in IT for over 20 years and was employed by New South Wales Health until he resisted vaccine mandates, leading him to losing his job last year. He's been a member of the LDP for over a decade. He was running in the 8th election. Running in his 8th election, Joaquim has a track record for advocating for individual freedoms and responsibilities. Joaquim lives in the Blue Mountains with his wife and 3 children. Joaquim de Lima.
I am asking you to reconsider what the purpose of government should be. Isn't free will important? Isn't that what makes us all special? Don't we tell our children they can accomplish anything they put their minds to? What do we do with our worst criminals? Do we subject them to public humiliation? Do we forsake their bloodline? Do we subject them to eye for an eye? Do we exile them? Do we banish them? No. We take away all of their freedom. They live a very secure life with no freedom. The primary purpose of government should be to assure the people's freedoms. I'm not a politician, despite this being the 8th election I'm running in. I'm an IT professional with a career that's over 22 years long. I run in these elections to represent people like me, people who believe the best thing the government can do for me and the collective good is get out of our way. Over the past several years, government's indifference to freedom has become so intolerable that I'm glad to say some of my competitors probably feel similarly motivated towards freedom. So why vote for me? Let's start with immediate relief. As I said, I'm an IT professional. In my field, no matter what you do, you need to be able to process information and use it to solve complex problems. All across the country, including in Hume, the people are being subjected to intolerable coercion that governments are getting very comfortable with using. How can you claim to be exercising the will of the people if you constantly have to resort to coercion? But this is a federal election, I hear you say. Most of the coercion is coming from the states. This is where we can use the size and scope of the major parties against them. I'm building a coalition of freedom candidates all across the country who all pledge, if elected, to vote against every question until the major parties ensure coercive state policies are removed. Not announced, not scaled back, removed. But what happens after we get the states back in line? Well, we have a lot of damage to repair, a lot of work to do. Here is where I might diverge from my other freedom candidates. The Liberal Democrats represent a philosophy that believes the individual is the best person to decide how to live their life. Remember free will? This means we solve problems with less coercion, less control, less government. In my personal industry, there's a similar philosophy widely adopted and growing, that the more options one has in how they perform a task, that the more efficient they are at performing that task. It's a pretty simple concept for a libertarian. So besides their philosophical roots, the Liberal Democrats' policies are created with the same perspectives as the powerhouses of the IT industry, with proven effectiveness. From the economy, to manufacturing, to the environment, or any other area that is important to you, I promise to craft a solution that will reduce the burden of government or increase options in how an end can be met, as well as efficiently solve a problem. But there is a catch. You really need to understand the problem to design a balanced solution. It is here where my IT career will become an asset, as the ability to process information is fundamental to the IT industry. Government should essentially be an organising force. With restored and increasing freedoms, the demand of an organising force is going to be high. It will be a good transition to shrink the size of government while empowering individual entrepreneurship. Investigative and enforcement functions in government could be converted into consultation functions that, instead of hampering an established business with regulatory burden, consult with an ambitious individual to get their business off the ground and help it grow. This is a function that would over time submit to competition from the private sector under standards held by government. Why should you vote for me? Because after restoring your precious freedoms, I promise to craft and promote policies to shrink the power and burden of government. Because I do not want to do this job forever, once the power dynamic between the people and the government is adequately balanced, I will design a system of real-time proportional representative government that will put me and my colleagues in Parliament out of work, because nobody should want to do this job.
And last, but by no means least, is Dolan, independent. Shelley is a human rights activist and youth advocate, having represented Australia to various United Nations agencies and international discussions. She has had a long interest in human rights, stemming from her parents' migration to Australia and volunteering with organisations such as Vincent de Paul. She established her own not-for-profit youth-held human rights organisation, the Dolan Faith Alliance, based in Western Sydney. Shelley has a dual law and global studies degree and is admitted to New South Wales as a lawyer. Shelley Dolan.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shelley Dolan. I have paused my life and my career to enter as a public servant and to represent you truthfully because, well, just like you all, I've had enough. I'm here to restore a moral compass into politics, and as far-fetched that may sound, it is possible when we elect the right and truthful individuals into Parliament. I'm here to become an instrument to voice your struggles, issues and concerns, and to work with you, not just for you. Fighting for people's rights is not a passion that I have developed overnight. I've been strengthening myself in this passion for many, many years, in fact, since the age of 9. I'm here to advocate for families in our electorate that are struggling to keep up with the rise in the cost of living. I'm here to fight for our senior citizens who lack financial means to service the rise in the cost of living and deficiency in affordable housing. I'm here to voice the frustrations of our young Australians who, like me, are struggling to have trust in our current government and their policies because they are negatively impacting our common futures. I'm here to ensure that there is a greater respect and diversity in our Parliament so that all citizens feel comfortable and represented and so that your voices can rattle the halls of Parliament. I'm here to ensure a sustainable future without threatening the livelihoods of our citizens. I will set the precedent as your true independent to ensure that your trust is not diminished. I'm here because we have varying needs within our electorate, from the multi-generational farming families in Bundanoon who are struggling to keep up with their legacies afloat, to the families living in Camden who are struggling with the potential impacts of the new Western Sydney Airport and the rise in cost of living. I'm here because there is a child with a disability next door whose parents are struggling to keep up with the medical and therapy costs because of the NDIS cutbacks. I'm here because I saw firsthand the working conditions and staff shortage in the aged care sector, where our senior citizens are not treated as humans, and organisations have fully endorsed a profit-driven approach and not a human rights-based approach. I'm here because of you. I will persevere over the challenges and barriers standing before me, and my determination to serve you all will always prevail. I have had enough, and I know you have too. I will be everything that Angus Taylor is not. I am Lila. I am progress, honesty, transparency, and justice. Thank you.
And I will ask the questions, and we'll start at the other end, Joaquin, and just hold up your mic, and it will be simply a question of yes, no, or pass. We won't enter into discussions about these topics. People have to later on, but we just want the audience to get a feel for where you stand on topics that have become fairly dominating over the last few weeks since the election was called. Okay, so the first question. when I put my backpack last night. Right. Do you agree with offshore detention of asylum seekers? Yes, no, or pass?
No?
Pass.
No.
Yes.
Absolutely not.
No.
No. Yes.
Thank you. Less heckling, please. Funding of private schools. Should we increase the level that we presently give them, decrease it, or remain as it is? We'll start again at the other end. Okay, Rebecca, do you want to start this time? And needless to go on, leave it like that.
No, I don't believe in additional funding.
Thank you.
Decrease.
One word.
Maybe.
Decrease.
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 Down.
Thank you. Next question. Let's start again with Rebecca. Do you agree that Australia needs a federal anti-corruption commission?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes, but with proper safeguards.
Absolutely.
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 Of course.
Yes, but the Industrial Relations Commission didn't help us.
Okay. In the event of a hung parliament, would you support Liberal National Party, Labour, or undecided as yet? We'll start again with Rebecca.
Undecided. Undecided.
Well, it has to be undecided. Depends who's
That's the answer.
Undecided.
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 This is a hard one for me, obviously Labor. I'm from Labor.
No to all.
Okay. Should our emissions target of greenhouse gases be? Liberal National at the moment is 26 to 28%, Labour is 43%, the Greens is 75%, or other. So do you support Liberal National, Labour, or the Greens, or none of the above?
That's a format breaking question, but no, it shouldn't be a thing.
It definitely needs to be much higher than it is, so I've been heading up towards the plus 50%.
I agree with it somewhat, but I believe the number should be looked at, and maybe the 26 to 28% is probably ideal.
I believe it needs to be a lot higher as well.
Yes, I agree it needs to be higher.
Greens. Higher.
Thank you. This is no place for politics. Thank you very much. Completely different topic. Should dental care be covered by Medicare? Rebecca.
Yes.
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 I'd like it to, but it shouldn't.
We'll take that as a undecided. Not quite a slap on. Should Australia have a Bill of Rights?
Yes.
Maybe.
Definitely needs to be discussed.
Absolutely.
It needs to be discussed.
It's part of our policy.
Undecided on a personal level. 100%. Yes.
One more question. Do you support nuclear power in Australia for power generation?
Yes. No.
Yes.
No.
It's one of our policies, yes.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yes.
Terrific. Now you get a good feel for where people are standing, which is terrific. So we're going to have questions from the floor and questions from the back office. So hands up, and then Bruce will go and stand beside you and hold the mic. Rebecca down the back, I think. Do you want to ask? Oh, sorry. Okay, keep going, Bruce. That lady right up to your right. Okay. Okay. So now, sorry. Before you start, I'll give you the rules. Your question must be direct. It must be short. It must be to the point. I will cut you off if it's not. And you're a school teacher, so I know you know what this is all about.
Excellent.
And you're from Exeter, so you're just in our electorate. So just be careful when speaking. The candidates, if you're directing it to a particular candidate, can you please mention their name, not their party?
Okay.
You can direct it to 2 people or 3 people. If you direct it to one person, they'll get 2 minutes. If you direct it to the panel, each member of the panel gets 1 minute if they want it. Timing is everything in the world, and this is no different here. So if it's directed at you directly, I think I explained this outside, you've got 2 minutes. If it's not directed at you directly, you get 1 minute. But if you want to comment after the person to whom the question has been directed, put your hand up, and if you want to make a comment, you have that minute. Okay, so we'll take the first question.
Okay, great. The question is about the Help to Buy housing scheme that your party has put forward, and I applaud you for that. Not surprisingly, that Scott Morrison has come out with a bit of a scare campaign about that, saying that when you reach that threshold of 90,000 for an individual...
Question, please.
Sorry, can you tell us what the reality is of what happens to a family when they have reached that financial threshold? Are they forced to sell?
No, they're not forced to sell. Sorry, I'm just going to try and give very direct answers tonight because I'm sure you're sick of people waffling, but no, they're not forced to sell. And I think can I add something to that, if that's okay? I think housing is a complex policy area, and that announcement from Labor is on top of the existing arrangements that the coalition have brought in. And I think it's, and also we're building additional social housing, 30,000 units, as well as housing specifically for women and children fleeing domestic violence as well. So housing is a very complex area, and the idea is to have a suite of measures to address different people in different situations. So I think it's very complex. And we probably next need to start talking about short-term accommodation and assisting people with rental accommodation as well. So it is complex, but good question.
Thank you. Would anybody else on the panel like to comment on that question? Yes, Karen.
I think it's great to have a suite of measures as to what's available to people for dealing with the housing affordability crisis. At the Greens, we've pledged 1 million homes over 20 years, and we have the view that houses are homes, not commodities. And I think we all need to address the reality of how that pans out in everyday life. And certainly in our Camden area, I've been part of a wider non-partisan group in trying to deal with nurses' quarters there that are owned by the state government that have been empty since the 80s. Now, in terms of emergency accommodation or short-term accommodation, we need to address some of those to ensure that we can deal with the fact that there are people homeless, yet empty government buildings, and that's got to be part of the solution as well.
Thank you. That was Danny, by the way, who used to be the principal in the preschool here in Bundanoon, so she could be local. I'm going to ask the next question, and then Bruce, maybe you can go to Ian at the front row and take the question after I have asked Ross. This is a question directed to you by questions that have come in. You want Shooters and Fishers Party not to be ignored by city-centric policies. Why are the Nationals not your natural allies? Have they let you down? You've got 2 minutes.
Well, the Nationals have got nothing to do with us. They haven't let us down. They've let down their constituents. They've let down the people in the seats of Orange and Barwon and Murray, and probably Dubbo as well. And we've stepped in and given those seats what the people there wanted. They now have the representation that they were looking for, as I said before, The major parties have lost their way. They don't look after the electorates anymore, and that's what we do. And we've been looking after those electorates very well. We'll get re-elected then, and I think we'll get more seats in the next state election. We haven't any of this, the federal arena yet, because we haven't tried. This is just the beginning of what we're doing now. That is the question.
Okay, thank you. And I think at the front, can you give your name, please, before you ask the question?
Sure. My name's Ian Armstrong, local Bundanoon. My question is for Gary. With housing interest rates rising now, and look like there's going to be a continued number of increases this year, your deputy leader of the party, Cracken, has said on advertising that he's going to cap interest rates at 3%. I'd like to know how he plans to do that, given interest rates are set by the Reserve Bank, which is an independent body. Could you please answer that, please?
Yes, so basically the Reserve Bank, the cash rate is set by the RBA, as you said. The banks were controlled in legislation in the 1980s from the actual government to, as the interest rates go from the government. It was in legislation back then, and the Hawke and Keating government changed that, gave full control to the Reserve Bank. We believe from the Constitution, because this was is legislation through the Constitution, that we can control the sections of the bank, control all the bank and what they charge on the interest rates from the RBA. We can't control the RBA, but we control what the banks can do. So what happens is the banks at the moment put about a 2.5% rate on top of whatever the cash rate is, and they pass it on. Obviously, we want to cap it at 3%. So at this stage, the cash rate is 0.35. So it's got to go up nearly 10 times before the banks start breaking even. And by that stage, they might even say, "Well, we're not going to give our money anymore because the bank loans aren't profitable for us." There's two things. First thing is primary resident mortgages are only 15% of what banks' revenue is, so they're not going to die from it, that's for sure. And they also have, well, I don't know anybody, from my point of view, is we, being 15%, we are more interested in saving people's homes than from the bank's point of view. And if the banks decide not to lend this money out for home loans, it's a free market. The free market will open up, and there'll be other investment opportunities for other people, including maybe a sovereign bank even. This is another thing that we can talk about as time goes on, because I think everybody would like to talk about a sovereign bank.
Thank you, Gary. 2 minutes. Karen would like to comment on the same question.
Being probably the most left-wing on the panel, so we constantly get referred to as communists. But I've never seen a policy as interventionist as this one. And so I think, Ian, it's good to question. Whilst I understand it's to deal with cost of living, I still think that the government has proven that their intervention in the financial sector's market is absolutely fraught with danger, and I think that's something we need to be very careful about.
Thank you. Bruce, we'll take question. Oh, sorry, Joaquin would like to comment on that, but if you stand beside the gentleman.
Just a quick add-on, in case you don't know this, the Reserve Bank of Australia Act has secrecy provisions that allows them to dodge accountability for what they do. If you get rid of those secrecy provisions, maybe you'll find you get better results.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to comment on that? No? Thank you. Okay. From the floor.
Yes, my name's Tom. I live in Bundanoon. I would like to ask each of the candidates, your second preference, yes or no, will be to the Liberal Party. Will your second preference be to the Liberal Party?
Okay, well, it's a straight question. We'll start at the second. Rebecca.
No. Oh, yes. So the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers is our second, and Liberal Democrats is our third, and United Australia Party is our fourth, followed by the two independents, and then we've got Angus Taylor third last. So to answer your question, he's at the bottom. Yeah, third last, and then we've got obviously Labor and Greens. But no, he's not. To answer the question, no, the Liberal Party is not second.
No, we've chosen to put the Liberal Party last in our preferences. We've been horrified at the lack of action of this government in any capacity in terms of climate change, action on climate change. And I think there's not enough gates running around, a la Grassgate,
Sorry,
Watergate.
thank you, Paris. So it's just a simple question. Ross?
No, they're not second preference. To take Jock on this. Congratulations, Jock. Angus is right down the bottom somewhere. The numbers are happening so far down that just won't matter.
Thank you.
No, I'm not preferencing at all. I'm standing true to being an independent.
No, he's down fifth for us, and Lib Dems is second for us as well, so well done, Trevor.
I don't recommend preferences on my how to vote card, but we suggest Mr Taylor goes last at number 9.
Over my dead body that he's number 2 on my ticket. We have got him, I think, number 6, because as a party we have to be sort of consistent across a range of seats as well, so it's a little bit more complicated. But
thank you, Greg.
Just to clarify, I got to choose my own in the lower house, so it's the Freedom Miners first, then the Miners, then Independents, then Majors last.
Thank you. Terrific. We seem to have quite a few questions from the floor, so Bruce, do you want to bring the microphone over to this gentleman here? And I will ask Bobby a question directly at you. According to your website, the Liberal Democrats believe in shrinking the size of government. Where, when, and how do you propose to do that?
As I alluded to in my opening, I think that there's a difference between a utopia of what you would do versus what's realistic and how much you can move within the Overton window. So if elected, I would try to use the enforcement arms of the government that have been squishing you down, both personally and privately, to actually empower you to use your freedoms to prosperity.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to jump into that? I don't think anybody else is advocating small government. And the gentleman in the second row, if you could ask a question, name first, please.
My name's Mark. The question's for Penny. Penny, you've stated that you do not have any preferences, and this is evident by your how to vote card. However, the interest groups Voices of Hume and Vote Angus Out have listed preferences on your behalf. Your comments, please.
I have been endorsed by those.
I have been endorsed by both of those way back. However, there is not a connection between either of those groups, and I still stand by what it says on my how to vote card, and that's what we tell people at the polling booths, is that I ask those people who are voting to choose their own preferences. This is a democracy. Those people are smart enough to work out who they want to put after me.
Sorry, we don't allow for follow-up. Thank you, anyway. Yeah. Bruce, you can go down the back. I think it's a lady down the back. At the very, okay, sorry. Why don't you take the interest down there? Sydney, I should say, sorry.
Good evening. My name's Mandy. I was question for a lot of you, yes or no. Do you have a plan to make our communities more inclusive? Housing, access around our towns, transport.
That's a huge question. I don't know if we have time to cover all that, but you've got a minute each to synopsise your thoughts.
I'll jump in just very quickly. I hear a lot of this in these sorts of forums where people talk about what you can do for our community specifically. You're choosing us as federal representatives of 100,000 people to make laws for everyone. If you've got a problem with corruption, then you should probably stop asking for specifics.
Sorry, who asked that question? I couldn't see. Oh, sorry, I was looking all over the place. I think Labor introduced NDIS, which I think is a very empowering program. It's not a form of charity, it's a way of allowing people to realise their full potential and participate in society. So I think that's a very important step. We've always traditionally also supported strong public transport, and Labor's talking about an experiment with fast rail between Newcastle and the Central Coast, I believe, as a first step. I think that's really important because we haven't spent enough on our public transport. There are Camden, for instance, needs a train and still hasn't got a train, and I know that's a state issue, but we would strongly pressure states to make sure that they're keeping up with infrastructure because we're really behind. Seem to have governments at a state level that love to develop areas, but they don't want to invest in the essential infrastructure that goes with it, and I hope I'm answering your question correctly, but all that kind of stuff is tied up with properly planning around that infrastructure and access for people as well. And I spent a lot of time up in Camden particularly, and those areas, and there's just a fundamental lack of
Thank you, Craig. Time's up. Denise.
We need to, when we decide to put in a community, that we actually have planning first, and we make sure that the community is consulted as well. So things around transport, roads, health facilities, while they may be state, we need to have federal oversight that makes sure that planning happens and consultation with the community around it for everybody in the community. It needs to be inclusive of all people, so all people can live in that community, and there is planning and consultation prior to that so that everybody is satisfied.
Yes, I also agree that there's a lot of lack of infrastructure around the place and lack of transport and the lack of a lot of things at the moment. A lot of it has to do as well as the debt that we're in as a country. I've seen some of these council local budgets, and they are paper thin because we're constantly trying to service money going basically to the other side of the world that the government doesn't have anymore. They've got to service it, otherwise there's big ramifications. So from the United Australia Party point of view, we have plans and policies in place to ensure we're going to pay this debt off, or at least balance the books, as they say. We can balance the books, then we've got a lot of money to make sure that it comes back to you people. That's what the idea of it is. And the infrastructure can be looked at properly and from a positive point of view.
Mandy, thank you so much for your question. It's a really important question. I'd have to say, as my part of my response is that one thing I'm really focused about is respect and diversity, and that's making sure that we encapsulate the whole electorate. I mean, we're talking about, suburban areas, for example, Camden and so on, and then we're talking about well inside, which is like Burwa, and the need for infrastructure and so on varies between the areas. And what I would have to say is that the root cause for a lot of these discrepancies would be the lack of community consultation. So what I'm proposing is that we need to actually have government-funded community committees where there's a representative from all areas, from all villages and towns on the same table. Then they can come and go and tell the representative, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to voice in Parliament. To make sure that we get infrastructure in there, we need to get all sorts of aged care, investment in aged care, and NDIS. I mean, there's so many cutbacks. It's something that's really close to my heart as well. So I think we need greater community consultation first and foremost.
We just say infrastructure is part of our federal policies. It's also part of the state policies, and it's part of listening to the community and then working back from that as to getting the job done. If there are things that need to be done at state level, like this is state law, not federal law, then we have enough people in the state parliament to have a big influence on what happens in this seat, whether we're represented here or not. I'm already looking at things that affect this seat through the state parliament, through people that I know, people we have there that can influence the Premier.
Well, thanks, Mandy. I think when you're looking at an inclusive society, there's a number of facets to that. We don't want people to have to be dictated as to where they live because there's a lack of resources in where they are as well. But we also don't want people to feel attacked because of who they are, because party or people decide they're going to point the finger and say, well, I don't like how that lifestyle exists. And I think percentages create rhetoric around whether or not things deserve comment. And I think it's important that we have respect for each other, respect for lifestyles, and understand that whilst we may not approve of certain things, we do have to look at does the modern lifestyle or the community need to comment negatively about lots of things, or can we actually be inclusive and respectful in that discussion? I think that's really important. But yeah, I agree that there's an infrastructure failure in design, and I think that's council and state, all tiers of government have been part of that as well. So I think that needs to be managed. And coming from Dubbo, where I had to leave Dubbo because the resources for education weren't available to me there. That makes a hard start when you've got to support yourself from the word go.
I'd like to see more infrastructure. So where I live in Douglas Park, we get a train come once every hour, and if you miss that train, then you've got to wait for the next one, which could be any time. Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that, can I talk? Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that you've got one demographic, and obviously Bundanoon as well, that doesn't have access to the transport facilities that someone else in an area might have access to. So also the roads, that's just something that, like coming here tonight was extremely dangerous, and there's been funds allocated from the federal member, like for the Picton hub at, it was $3 million actually from the bushfire fund. Picton wasn't impacted badly by the fire, and yet it's something that only a small part of the community can access. Somebody that doesn't want to work from home, they want to use this hub on a temporary basis or every few days. So that's a lot of money, taxpayer money, that has gone to a small part of the community that barely any of us would use. So I'd like to see, obviously, money getting dispersed amongst all areas that can make life easier for all of us.
Thank you, Rebecca. A couple of questions down the back. Thank you. Bruce, nice and brief, please.
Thank you. Bruce Pratt, local resident, 30 odd years. Addressing all of the candidates, a particular issue that I'm very, very concerned about, and it's going to be a yes or no answer. I'd like to know whether or not, I'll just go back. I have a particular concern with the manner and state that our waterways, our rivers throughout the nation have completely been buggered up by such a wide array of policies and this.
Bruce, sorry, question please.
So, would you support a Royal Commission into our major river systems inside Australia?
Thank you. Terrific. We'll start with you, Brent.
I don't have a problem with the investigations here. I can support that.
Yes, and I think long overdue.
Yes, and then we need to put the recommendations into place.
Yes, I know plenty of farmers that have problems with water for this exact reason, yes.
Yes, and just like Penny said, the recommendations need to be enforced.
Yes, and it's a major part of our policy, and I recommend you read our policies, which are online, which deal significantly with water rights.
Yes, I think natural resource management has to be overseen and recommendations implemented.
Yes, and it's in one of our policies.
I think that's unanimous. We'll take another question down back, and then Bruce, if you can come over to this side, there's a lady with her hand up. So we'll take the question down back first. Thank you.
Early childhood teachers.
Sorry, your name, please.
Rachel Russell, local resident. Early childhood teachers need the same qualifications as primary school teachers, yet they don't get equal pay. In fact, they're paid as untrained workers. Will you fight to make sure they get equal pay that represents their training and responsibilities?
I presume that's two. Rebecca, if you want to start, please.
Yes, having a sister who's in the childcare industry, I would support that, definitely.
Yes, and there's certain requirements for suitably qualified people to be employed in those places. And I think that goes towards dealing with the gender pay gap, where it's predominantly females and they do earn far less than their counterparts in schools. So yes, most wholeheartedly agree.
Yes, and it's a major part of our policy as well, especially training in rural areas and attracting people to rural areas instead of the city, and supporting those people with accommodation and other allowances to get them into these rural areas where they currently don't exist. Again, it's in our policies, and I recommend you read them.
Yes, and again, it's part of fair and equal treatment as well, and giving that same opportunity. And I think the other thing that Karen just mentioned is, when I agree, is that it's part of the gender pay gap. So, and that's something that needs to be addressed ASAP. So, absolutely yes.
Yes, I have no problems with this. I understand you guys offer so much security to so many families, working families. So yes,
Absolutely.
Education is the keystone of a good democratic system and we have to protect it. So yes, we need to find equal pay for those workers, and we know already, and I as a teacher know, that people are walking out of the schools, they'll walk out of all educational institutions if we don't give them the respect, the conditions and the pay that is warranted to them.
Yes, and I agree with everyone else on the panel. I'm a high school teacher and admire what you do. It's amazing. I don't think I'd have the patience. You're incredible. So yes, absolutely. And that's an investment in those children's future too, because it's such a crucial age to get kids, developing skills. I think it's very important.
I've been in a sea of teachers protesting that they couldn't make a living, adjacent to another sea of teachers protesting that they were overworked. So my highest priority is to lift the mandates so that we can get thousands of teachers back to work. Apart from that, the Liberal Democrats have policies to eliminate waste in government by removing duplicate departments. So Department of Education would go under that. And we also have a policy where the resources should follow the child or the student so that parents can make the decision of the best provider.
Panel, this is now good. You're all agreeing. The purpose tonight is to create change and progression. If you keep agreeing, it's a waste of time. We'll take a question from the lady here.
Yes, Leanne Tyler, also a Bundanoon resident. Do the candidates believe that choosing to have gender realignment surgery is the business of government? Yes or no?
That would have been directed to Angus Taylor had he been here, but we'll start with Rebecca in a second.
No. I believe that's the parents' 100% decision in what happens with their children, so absolutely not.
Yeah, I think the government needs to know where it's at, and I think most of us have been frustrated at the infiltration of government into things like that, and the rhetoric around that in the last few weeks has been absolutely horrific, and I'm so apologetic to people having to live with the stuff coming out of Catherine Dee's mouth and endorsed by the Prime Minister.
If anybody else wants to make a comment?
Reflect those earlier comments.
Yeah, no, I can just wholeheartedly agree with what Karen just said there. It's just an area that should not be politicised at all. I just feel like the government needs to stay out of it. And the comments that have been coming out of the Liberal government so far has just been extraordinarily disrespectful. So I say just stay out of it altogether.
No.
We need to have the government step out of these areas. To politicise that has been a hurt and an anxiety for too many people.
It's been very distressing to watch the current government politicise that and hurt people. It's hard enough being young as it is without doing that, so I agree, no.
No, including funding.
Thank you. Not that you're done this. We have another question down there, and then Bruce. Bruce, when the lady is finished, if you could go to the gentleman with the hand up. Thank you. Question, please.
Hi, my name's Angelique. I'm from Bundanoon. I have a quick question. What's your plan to pay down the debt?
I'm sure she's talking about the national debt, which is supposed to be $1 trillion at the stage, or 67% of our GDP. Big question. Let's start at the other end with Joaquin.
Well, I think generally generally not trying to legislate prosperity or expertise or the extinction of a-holes is probably a good start to help the recovery. So I would absolutely want to get more efficiency and more remove the duplication from government.
I think debt, if it's good, so-called good debt, if it's debt that it's investing in productivity, is actually a bonus because it expands the economic pie and we can do more as a country. So I think what Labor has objected to, they haven't objected to the coalition's debt over the last 3 years. It's an extraordinarily difficult time And the only way to get through it was massive government spending. And that's been duplicated across almost every country. But the way that they've invested it, we would disagree with. So we think it should have been used as an opportunity to do things like finish the NBN, which is a productivity gain because you're connecting people. Investing in transport, we've been talking about infrastructure, would have been a great time to say, okay, we're missing fast trains here and we're missing public transport in Camden, for example, let's do it now, and invest in that now. So I think debt, as long as it's increasing our efficiency and benefiting the economy or investing in new industry, I think it's good. So Labor's plan is to do that kind of investment so that we expand the economic pie.
Sorry, Greg, should have mentioned what Labor would do earlier. Minutes up.
Sorry.
Next 12 minutes.
Look, I think investment in our industry and manufacturing, bringing them back here, is a way of getting money into our economy to reduce the deficit. But we also need to look at that other side of the pie where so much is wasted on privatisation, on other wasted projects. We really need to look at the waste in government, because we will probably be able to find there's a portion that we can save from the pay down on the deficit if we stop wasting money, but we do need to reinvest that money in good projects and in our industry and our manufacturing, and bringing it back so that we can then make that money to reduce the deficit.
Reducing the debt is one of the United Australia Party's key policies. We understand this debt, the way it is at the moment, is one of the single biggest forces driving the cost of living up. Basically, the World Banks are trying to stop us borrowing anymore and to make it look unattractive. They raise interest rates, which eventually filters down through to all of us. So we have obviously a key policy to put a 15% licence fee on all our iron ore, which has been the homework's been done on to ensure that they cannot go to other places throughout the world. They can't expand. For our quality of iron ore, 80% of our world's iron ore comes from Australia, and we have the 15% licence fee to pay this debt off to ensure our cost of living pressures will be reduced. That will single-handedly help the cost of living.
Thank you for the question. I think with countries like ours as well, I think sometimes debt is inevitable, but what we can do is really rethink where we are spending. So really going back to the drawing board and thinking, okay, could we have done better here, or should we have invested here? Because a lot of the times what we see now is investment just going completely into just the abyss of nowhere, basically. There's no return or investment in that. And for example, one thing I can say is the continuous investment in the fossil fuel industry, but not transitioning to high-tech renewable energy and resources. That's a clear indication and example of just how much our current government is wasting investment when we could be investing in transitioning our economy, and a slow transition, a gradual transition. So I really think debt sometimes is inevitable, but we need to make sure we're able to maximise our opportunities and economic comeback from that. But as long as we're investing in the right places and creating opportunities for our future generations and our younger people right now, which is a massive concern of mine.
That was a really good question, and it's a good question because neither of the two major parties are addressing it in this political campaign. There's a massive amount of debt there. The fact that it's there, it doesn't really matter much now how it got there. The fact is it is there, and it needs to be dealt with going forward. Traditionally, economically, the way you deal with large debt in a country is to either raise taxes or reduce expenditure, or you allow bracket creep to come in and raise taxes by stealth. And the last thing really is what the major parties are looking at doing. None of them are looking at reducing expenditure. In fact, they're all talking about increasing expenditure. And debt is important as what you do with the money. But you get to a point where you need to manage the debt level you have at government level, and you need to have a policy around doing that. And that's what we're not seeing in either of these two major parties. The obvious thing to look at is reducing expenditure. The expenditure we have in government at the moment is prolific, and it needs to be brought in. It's not just an easy question to answer. It needs to be reined in and look for savings that can ultimately bring the debt level down. But you will find that both parties will result in increasing taxes, either by stealth or directly. They won't tell you how to do it.
Thank you, Austin. Ross?
I think debt with an underlying income producing asset or a reasonable investment can serve the community well. I think we've got ourselves to over $1 trillion debt with not much to show for it in that, other than incompetence is what I would suggest. So I would like to see the JobKeeper recouped that went to ASX listed companies that certainly didn't need it with no clawback provisions. The Greens would propose a 6% wealth tax on billionaires, a 40% tycoon tax on companies with over 100 million turnover and super profits. I think and tax avoidance, tax evasion, I think we have to address the multinationals using the resources that belong to all Australians and then using accounting, elimination and consolidation entries to get that out of the country where things aren't being paid for and appropriate taxation is not happening here. And I think addressing those things would pay down a lot of that debt so that the interest on that debt isn't crippling Australians as we go forward.
So our party policy is we want to see the multinationals get their fair share of taxes. We'd like to see the government spending reeled in and stop the wastage. And we'd also like to see the politicians' wages and benefits reduced.
Thank you very much. Before we take the question from the floor, I just have a question for Greg. I'm asking each of the candidates an individual question, so I need to intersperse that with questions from the floor. So, Greg, what type of federal ICAC commission would Labor support? And would it cover politicians as well and incorporate liability? You've got 2 minutes starting now.
That's a very difficult question. It would be separate from politicians. I think the model the coalition proposed where politicians were involved in the ICAC itself, which is terrible. So it's at arm's length from politicians, so that it's independent of Parliament, and it's transparent as well. I don't know about liability, so I'll have to take that one on notice. But the point is to have an ICAC with teeth. You want it separate from politicians. Having it not separate from politicians is like me being breaking and entering and deciding if I'll give myself up to the police or not. That's a ridiculous situation. So it will be an ICAC with teeth.
Thank you. Nice and brief. Would anybody else like to comment on that? No? Okay, I shouldn't have asked you anyway. We take questions from the floor. The gentleman.
Currently, I come from Vilma, where the lakes are full with water again, thankfully. But this time my question is about education. How would you address the very big imbalance of federal funding for wealthy private schools, where they at the same time can exclude anybody they don't like, kids with disability?
Sorry, the question, just to
the question is, how would you address the imbalance of federal funding to wealthy private schools, which does not go to the same extent?
Okay, we covered this briefly earlier. We've got people's opinions on that, but anybody in the panel want to tackle that nebulous topic?
Yes, nebulous topic. What we need to do is perhaps relook at the Gonski model where the funding followed it was assessed on the student need. I think we really need to reduce and relook at how much money, our federal money, our taxpayer monies, is going to fund private schools. Having worked with students with physical disabilities and disabilities such as emotional, post-traumatic, behavioural disorders, and you name it, there really needs to be a lot more funding in that area. As we go through, coming out of COVID as well, there are so many students that are in our public schools, they do not go to private schools, they're not welcome there. They are suffering from dysfunctional families, families that have dads in jail, families that are struggling with mental health. The issues that are happening in those homes that we don't see, but we see when we go to school and work with these students, is frightening. We need far more resources in there. We need to be paying teachers and respecting teachers so that they are willing to take on these students and to make their lives much better. We do need to readdress how much funding is going to federal and it is not coming to our schools, whether they're regional or inner city public schools.
Why don't you start and then we'll come down the table.
I think we also need to look at this issue too. I think it's unfair. And I think one issue we have in this electorate is that the New South Wales government aren't building public schools in new areas as well. So I met a family in up towards Camden who had to send their children to a private school even though they couldn't really afford it because there wasn't a public school in their area. So I think we're drastically underspending with our public schools, which is a real shame because we have one of the best public school systems in the world. And we've allowed that to erode over time. It's a much weaker system than it used to be. And education is a very, very important tool in allowing everyone, regardless of their financial background, to have a decent life and to get a good start in life. So I think it's really important.
Anybody else coming up? Chantal?
Yeah, I just wanted to say education, the moment we start to create some sort of gaps or discrepancies in education is the moment of our failure. I mean, the fact that there's, private schools are getting a little bit more funding because there might be some sort of benefit there and public schools aren't, there's a massive problem there. Every child has equal access to education and there should be equal amount of investment irrespective of your socio-economic background. It's as simple as that. And the fact that the government are deciding where they want to spend their money in education is a massive problem for me. And this is where we're going to go wrong, essentially. There needs to be greater investment, especially in public schools. And just like Penny pointed out, a lot of the public school system is being used by a lot of students that come from dysfunctional families and so on and so forth. So there needs to be greater investment. There's a lot of children with disabilities that access the public school system. So for that very reason, there needs to probably be a bit more greater investment in the public school system because of the varying needs. So I think that this is where we're going to fail if it doesn't get addressed now.
Thank you.
It is part of our policies that we publish that the education should be free and should be equal for all people. And there should be as I said earlier tonight, far more investment in the regional areas and these schools are available to regional people. People have to leave country areas to go to the city to get good education, and our belief is that shouldn't happen. And we should be moving toward as an education system that is still going to be best in the world and fair and free for everyone.
Neoliberalism favours a user pay model, and then yet we have the Liberal Party and free market economy not allowing the user pay model to stand on its own. And I think that's where we have a problem towards federal money going towards state-based infrastructure. Now, in chatting with someone who was the financial controller at a private school, there was, deal's not the right word, but there was a discussion, if you accept these proposals, then you will get your federal money granted to you early. Now, where do we know that that's happened and how do we know that? So I think that the state-based schools have to be the benchmark, and that's where we start from, because the resource allocation is very, very diverse, and that's not reasonable. And as one of the other candidates said, that we need to make sure that that's across the board available to all.
Yeah, just quickly. So 1.2 million children in Australia live in severe food insecure homes, and they have breakfast clubs at some of the local schools that's the only food that they get when they go to school. And I'd like to see the government investing more money into ensuring that it's not the community and the teachers and the parents that are organising that, but actually funding a better program to ensure that not only do the children have access to food through schools, but potentially extending that to the families and the parents of those students as well.
I also believe, we also believe in free education as well from the United Australia Party. That's one of our main policies. We also have another main policy that isn't really quite known, is we want to inject $20 billion directly into the education systems without going through the state route, because we believe it's mismanaged along the way, so we want to give it directly to the education institutions themselves. Myself coming from the public sector, I understand that the need for trying to keep up the private sector was very hard. You could see coming through the end of year 12, the private sector was getting a lot more advantages from where they come from and the money they spend. So I believe it should be equilibrium along the lines.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'll jump in too since we're all in too. This is directly from our Liberty Manifesto. I suggest you read it. Education spending has skyrocketed over the past 50 years and education standards have dropped. True education reforms requires taking power away from government bureaucracies to allow competition and school choice. We support funding students, not institutions. Personally, I'm a result of the public school system, which is why all my kids are homeschooled.
The gentleman behind the previous questioner has been there for a while. While you're getting the mic to that gentleman, Bruce, I will just ask a question of Gary. Your statements on your website say that your party believes in free speech, but two people, Jefferson Earl was disendorsed, as well as Sean Ambrose, for praising President Putin. Where does free speech start and where does opinion overlap?
Well, it's a hard one, but common sense must prevail still, I think, in the
Sorry,
end.
I missed that. What must
Common sense must prevail. I think in the end, obviously we can have free speech, but free speech there's a limit with free speech, what we say, obviously what we say about our kids, and the like. There is a line in the sand still with free speech, and it's got to be in the best interest of Australians in Australia. Some of these guys were advocating the wrong things for Australians, and rightly so, with their memberships and the like.
Sorry, just to follow up to that, Clive Palmer is front and central in your policies. Is he the one who decides who gets disendorsed?
No, not necessarily, actually. Craig Kelly makes most of the big decisions. He goes. But Clive Palmer, there is a group of them, but Craig Kelly is front foremost, for sure.
Right, I think that's very educational. Thank you. Thank you for being so concise as well. Right, back to the floor. Thank you.
My name is Trevor Wright. I'm a Bundanoon resident, colony of Burnie in Tasmania. My question is, I was absolutely astonished when a rape happened in Parliament House. My question to the panel is, when you're elected, what are you going to do to make Parliament House in Canberra a safe working place, particularly for women?
Right, so the panel wants to start.
We saw that debacle happen how many years ago now? And we had Kate Jenkins' report come out. I think the government sort of kind of endorsed about 7 of those, but there are many, more than 30 recommendations that need to happen, and they said they would do it, but we need to actually do them. Now, I'm astounded in a place like Parliament House, they do not have an HR department. Really? We really need to do something about that. Why is someone who has been raped going to the financial department to report that? That is absolutely disrespectful. We need to have that HR department at the very, very least, but we need those recommendations endorsed as well. I'm a teacher, I had to sign a code of conduct. Surely parliamentarians do as well. We need to make a safe place, safe from bullying, safe from sexual and attack and harassment, and we need to have that happening right now so that we know that so-called pinnacle of our democracy is acting the way that we would expect them to in any of our workplaces.
I endorse everything Penny said as well, and I think Labor's committed to endorsing all of the respective work recommendations. We believe that the Federal Parliament should be, the way it's run, should be a role model for the rest of the community and for our organisations. I work at a girls' school, and so it horrifies me sometimes to see this kind of stuff and see my students have to see it. I think partly too we would need to intervene so that we have more women in Parliament as well. I think if you have more powerful women role models, I think that helps, and that will help change the culture of the building. And Labor's moved a long way in that process, and I think that will help change the culture as well.
On Robbie, if you want to say something about it.
As I alluded to in my opening, my desire, my goal is to make parliamentarians redundant. I think there's far too many layers of secrecy and management and obfuscation between the will of the people and what goes on in Parliament House. So if it was up to me, everything would be transparent, if we're even there at all.
Thank you. Coming back up the table, Gary, did you want to say anything about that? No, okay, thank you. Sarah?
Trevor, thank you for your question, and that is one of the reasons why I'm running. So to make sure that there is greater respect for women in Parliament, just when you think that Parliament should be the most respectful place and we should all be able to take after, and then that happens, and then I just lose faith in the whole system. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Another thing is we need a code of conduct, so when I get there, and if I do get there, and if I've been given that opportunity to get there, then I will make sure that I voice up, because I'll tell you what, I'm not afraid to speak out when there's injustice. Done it before. So we need to have a code of conduct. I will make sure that the rule of law applies to every one of them, including those politicians in there.
It's a bit difficult to know where to start, but it shouldn't happen in Parliament, it shouldn't happen anywhere. And it's a lot to do with the way men do treat women, and some men, not all. And that goes to a society which rules in the way we all treat women, and the way the way in which we are role models for other men. And I think it's certainly something in Parliament House that shouldn't happen, but it shouldn't happen in society anyway. I've dealt as a lawyer with rape cases, and it's not very pleasant at all. It's just, unfortunately, some men are just like that. And it goes back to the way they're brought up, it goes into the education system, it goes into society generally. And we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that these things don't happen, whether it's in Parliament or whether it's outside of the train station or anywhere else. It doesn't really matter where it is, it's what's happening that's important, and how we make sure that this society has a set of rules in place and accountability, so that people who do commit these crimes know that they're going to get caught and know that it's going to be draconian results if they do get caught.
Thank you, Ross.
We all know that workplace culture, corporate governance, it all starts at the top in every single entity, and I think we can look at this government and say the things that have come out of that are horrific. Now, Scott Morrison and I happen to have a little crossover in acquaintances, and so to hear him speak at the Women's Safety Summit last year in relation to males and how they have a role in ensuring respect for women and safety for women, that he is friends with the minister from the Sydney church that failed to report my own sexual assault at that church. And so until Mr Morrison is willing to stand up to his own rhetoric and actually go and tap that minister on the shoulder and say, have you dealt with that? Was that appropriate? I'm going to be rather obstinate and certainly angry at the failure of Mr Morrison to manage safety at work for women and disrespect for Parliament House and for the prayer room as to all that's gone on there. It's an absolute disgrace, and I will not stand silent and kowtow to someone whose rhetoric is not met with his own action.
I think it's obvious that the majority of the politicians in there now lack complete integrity and respect for anyone. So obviously removing those and placing people with some moral compass in there would be a good start. But obviously following Brittany Higgins' story as well, something that came from that is that Parliament has its very own police reporting system where it doesn't go outside of Parliament House. So everything that was reported stayed within Parliament House and was easily covered over and swept under the rug. So I'd like to see, obviously, reporting options be outside that realm where people can be safe and comfortable and protected when they report these incidents and get justice.
Thank you very much. Down the centre, Thomas, while you're going down there, be standing up. While you're going down there, I'd like to ask Karen a question, please. When Kevin Rudd was in power, he proposed a carbon tax and it was stymied in the Senate by Mr Bob Brown. Your targets at the moment are so far removed from either Labour or Liberal Could the same thing happen again if Labour get in? Will you stymie what might be progress because of the stubbornness that Mr. Bob Brown displayed? I'm just paraphrasing the question, so don't take it personally.
No, that's fine. Look, I think we've grown as a party as well, and we have to look at whether you rule or you stay clear to ideologies or you have a discussion about what can be achieved. Now, I think you've got to keep in mind that we did work with Gillard in relation to actually getting that across the line. So people remember one part and not the other. So I think we've made no secret about what we want, and we want net zero by 2030, and that's what's recommended scientifically. I think discussions with both major parties need to be a strong transition, and how that's going to be achieved. It is mapped out, but it's going to be difficult for us given that both Liberal and Labor have a far less ambitious target to what we have. So I would certainly like to think that every situation is negotiable, because I think without negotiation we don't achieve anything much, and this government has modelled that. But certainly if I was elected, that's got to be an open discussion, and one which would be held, which would be had candidly with whichever government was in power. So it's a difficult one to answer because you can't anticipate proposals.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And, okay, we'll go with the lady first, and then 3 rows behind.
Oh, good evening. I'm asking all of you the same question, and you're doing it.
While you're doing that, I might ask the 2 independents a question, please. And I'm sorry to put the 2 of you together, but it's related. Again, don't take it personally, it's just the way it's been asked. The whole purpose of you standing is to get rid of Angus Taylor. By having 2 independents, you are splitting the vote, which means that your primary vote might not be high enough with preferences to topple Mr. Taylor. How do you justify having 2 independents? Did you sit down beforehand and discuss it? And the really horrible thing to ask is, if you can't decide between the 2 of you who would stand and increase the possibility of either of you getting over the line, how would you negotiate in Parliament? Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Thank you. You've got 2 minutes each.
No, thank you. It's a good question. In fact, that question's been asked quite a bit, and it's a really relevant question because, I mean, I think the thing here is that, I think everyone's sentiment is we all want to get rid of Angus Taylor. And we want someone that's able to take that responsibility ahead. Now, with all due respect to Penny, and you know, I'm very respectful of everyone. In fact, I think it's great that we have choice here. I think that's the main thing. As the Hume electorate, you all have choice. You have more than one to choose from. You know, the values are very much the same, at least in my eyes. I think we both want sort of the same, not sort of on behalf of Penny. But I actually announced my candidacy in March 2021, and since then have been canvassing the area, very quietly canvassing the area to make sure that I understand what the Hume electorate wants. I'm not a person that likes to sort of, you know, get things done in the last minute. I really like to be on the ground so that we're getting my work done and trying to understand what the issues are, because the electorate is so varied. And of course, you know, months later, Penny announced her candidacy as well. In my eyes, I understand, you know, technically and in a technical way, it will split the votes. That's very much true. It will split the votes. But I think, on a positive note, it gives everyone the choice. It gives choice. Yes, we have, you know, we do have the same sort of, I guess, you know, we want an honest, open, transparent government. That's what I stand for. But I think the main thing here is that, and I never looked at Penny's candidacy in any way harmful or anything. In fact, my whole objective was always to make sure that the Hume electorate has choice to choose from, because at the end of the day, it's up to you now. So you have 2 independents now. You have a decision to make. You can choose out of the 2. And I guess, you know, either or, I think you'll be quite fine.
Thank you. And Penny, I presume you would like to comment on that?
Okay, so when I was endorsed, it wasn't necessarily to get rid of Angus Taylor, it was to get a better representation for the community of Hume. And a little bit different from Shanali, I was actually selected, as you heard earlier this night, through public forums where a lot of people turned up, and I was one of 4 nominees and I was the one selected. So I came directly from the community and selected by the community. So quite different from Shanali's decision to stand. And like Shanali, I've been up and down the electorate talking to the community because they're the ones that will tell me and inform me as to what the issues are and how they want them dealt with best. Now, does it split the vote? Well, I suppose we've got 8 candidates here, guys. You know, that's going to split a vote, isn't it? You're going to have to make a decision. And if we did a straw poll here, we'd probably find, yes, everybody's voting for somebody different. Whereas if we only had 3 candidates, then, yeah, there'd only be 3 choices. But I think choice is good, but I think what it is important, and this is what we do as a democracy, is that we talk to the candidates, we find out what each of them, where they sit on different issues, and we talk to them personally, because what that person is personally and how they're able to project themselves is really important in a representative for the Hume electorate.
Thank you.
Try again now. I was trying to be succinct.
Okay.
I'm Angela Williamson, a local resident. I'd like to ask all of the panel, please, regarding our ABC, would you support restoration of the budget cuts to a properly funded and completely independent ABC?
Okay, if you have.
We were just talking about $1 trillion of debt, so no.
Yes, we would restore funding that's been cut from the ABC and also try to depoliticise it by putting on a 5-year funding cycle, so there's less chance that politicians interfere with it. The reduction in services has meant not only problems for us, diminished our media in Australia at a time when independent free media is so important with all the noise on social media. It's also reduced our soft power overseas. We don't have Australian culture, values and language being projected into our region. We are part of our region. We're a rich multicultural society and we should present that face to our region and leverage the tremendous soft power that we have, because our reputation several years ago in our region was a really, really good one, and it's been tarnished. And part of that is the reduction in funding of our institutions like the ABC and SBS.
We have to restore the ABC. During emergencies, they're the ones in regional areas that we turn to. People can't turn to Murdoch or anybody else. It is the ABC in emergency situations that everybody turns to. We cannot afford not to continue to fund and to restore those funds that have been cut through coalition governments over the years. And as Greg alluded to, if we cut the Pacific radio, ABC radio service out to all those Pacific areas, and suddenly another country took over feeding information to those people, we did a disservice. We need to refund and reinstate our ABC and keep it quite independent.
I personally don't necessarily agree with the cuts, but I do agree that the ABC have had a narrative for some time now, and unfortunately for a lot of people, I'm a regular listener from where I am. Sometimes it's the only thing I can listen to, and especially being a pilot. But there is accountability in what they say and how they portray their stories, and I think that's sort of gone far and wide with a lot of people and left a bad taste in some people's mouth. So from a realistic point of view, I like what they stand for to a certain degree, but they do have to be held accountable for what they say and what they get away with.
I think the problem here is that sometimes the truth is too bitter. So that's why then we see places like ABC getting all these cutbacks, because of course sometimes the truth is too bitter for the government. So I'm a firm believer of freedom of speech. I am first and foremost a human rights activist. Fighting for rights and freedoms is very much important to me. And the moment we start, heckling in with the right to information and so on, and freedom of speech is the moment we have a problem. And I guess, naturally we all sort of turn to social media and to news, and we turn the TV on, we look at the news, and that will define what our perception of reality is. So nowadays we need to have a really informed perspective to be able to make those decisions. And if we have a government that's cutting back on reliable resources and reliable sources, then we know where that's heading. I mean that can just go down the route of censorship. So we need to make sure there's independent organisations like the ABC out there being able to deliver the messages as much as possible, and not just having this biased perspective.
Thank you.
As I mentioned at the outset, Laura Tingle's the daughter of our founder, so I would be careful what I say. I'm sure I'll be under her. I've seen what she's like on TV. But obviously, no, we do support the ABC as an independent organisation, making it fully independent and not in favour of the cuts. Our policy is quite clear on freedoms of speech and for this freedom of speech for anybody in the publishing or in the media. And I think it goes beyond just the ABC. It needs to be that all the media is free to say whatever they want to say, whether they're government owned or not.
Angela, what budget cuts? They're efficiency dividends. Don't be scared. Let's not be scared of that. Obviously, an independent media is vital to dealing with accountability of government. So it's no surprise that the current government would be frightened of something that was independent and able to, and publicly owned, and actually able to hold them to account. Last year, my family had an episode made by Four Corners, and it was as part of that every comment that we made had to be backed up by, not hearsay. If that person wouldn't come on screen and say this or they say that, then it wasn't going to air. There was a lot of care that went on there. And I think we have people on the right saying, well, they don't like what the ABC says. We have people on the left saying, well, we don't like what it says. Obviously, no one on the left or the right are ever going to agree with each other. So the ABC is there to protect the centre, and I'm okay with that. And I sit on the left. So I think we need to acknowledge the enormous role that a publicly owned broadcaster plays in our society, not just from the emergency sector and getting out to those far-to-reach areas, but in terms of protecting the centre of politics so we don't drift too far either way and get really unpleasant outcomes that none of us could potentially foresee. But having to deal with the ABC firsthand, they were fantastic.
Thank you.
I'll just keep it short. I don't support cuts, but I just believe that there's more pressing issues to address at the moment.
Terrific, thank you. We are supposed to finish at 8:30. I'm going to ask Rebecca one question because I have asked everybody else a question, and then we'll take a question from Thomas once I've done this, and we will discuss continuing. But let's go. Okay, Rebecca, sorry, the old glasses again. On your website, it says that no Australian should feel like a second-class citizen, but your leader voted no to marriage equality in 2017. How do you explain that, and do you agree with the majority of Pauline Hanson's views?
So I can't obviously speak for Pauline Hanson, and one thing that about One Nation is I'm able to be an independent candidate in the sense that I don't have to toe a party line, so I can have my own views and my own opinions. I agree with the majority of the things that Pauline Hanson has to say when it comes to putting Australia and Australians first and resolving the issues that we have in this country. And that obviously means everybody that's here, that lives in this country. We want to see us thriving. We want to see everybody with equal opportunities to work, to have housing, to obviously reduce the debt so that our taxes don't continue to increase. And so, as I said, I can't comment on her particular opinion because I'm my own candidate in the One Nation Party. But to answer the question, I do align a lot with her views, but necessarily not everything.
Terrific, thank you. Lovely diplomatic answer. One from Thomas Anfield in York.
Thomas Anfield from Exeter. I've grown up in this electorate my whole life, and having grown up in a blue ribbon Liberal electorate, I've often valued or questioned the secrecy of my vote and whether.
Thomas, question.
My question is, you only have to look at insiders on Sunday to see the young person in my demographic would have voted for the person with the most posters around. I want to know from your mouths, not your preferencing, where my preference would go. Penny, if I voted for you, I'd love you to get up, I'd love Ray to get up, I'd love this to get up. But if you don't, where your preferences will go. Because I've often felt that my vote in this electorate has been a wasted vote.
Thank you.
Can I answer that one? Let's have a think about what happens in preferential voting. Okay, so there's 4 candidates, and at the end they count out all your first preferences. So we've got A, B, C and D. A and B are pretty close, so they look at D, which didn't get too many votes. They don't throw them away straight away, they look at their second preference. And if one of those, if that second preference was for A, B or C, then they will put it straight over as a first vote to, let's say they give it to A. Then they think, okay, well, we've still got a bit of a tie here, we're very close, let's have a look at this C party, okay. They gave a preference to A as well, okay. That was the second preference, and so that goes to this party. And so that gives the A preference, makes them the winner.
How do young people work that out?
You go to YouTube and Friendly Geordies, or you can even go to one on a YouTube site that is linked to ours to tell you, because I think most of us, and I include myself in that, when you really look down to it, some of the votes for a very low scoring party doesn't have that vote's not thrown away straight away. Their second preference is gone. That's what happens in preferential voting.
Right, thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, and maybe communicate this to your friends, make sure you do 1 to 9 too. One thing that worries me is that people will get fired up and go in and put number 1 next to someone they love and forget to do the other numbers, and then your preference is lost, so that's really, really important. So your vote really does count. I think a preferential system is excellent, but it's powerful because you do get to have those options. So make sure you do 1 to 9. Really important.
I just wanted to say one thing, that we don't give preferences. You give preferences. When you fill out the ballot paper, you fill out your preferences. We don't do it. And so if preferences go the wrong way, well, you've got to think about how people do. You may get a how to vote card, which gives you a suggestion of how to fill out the form, but you don't have to follow that. You can do whatever you like. If someone says, I'm number 1, and someone says number 2, well, you can make me number 1 and someone else number 2. It's up to you. You've got to think through what you want to do with the preferences. That's what the system's all about. It gives you the opportunity to have a layered vote as to how you want things to happen.
Thank you. What about the other end?
I didn't watch the piece that you're referring to, but I hate having to do posters and how to votes, and I often meant that the skill set required to do the job well and to get elected barely overlap at all. You're the difference. You and everyone that you know and of your generation. Go look at Topher's marble videos, learn the rules so that you can hold us all accountable.
Thank you. Karen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Thomas, I won't go into the preferential voting because Penny's done that, but don't lose sight of the fact that a sitting cabinet minister will take note of any swings against or towards. So don't be afraid to, that was not me, I hope, I'm quite powerful. Don't lose sight of that. So even if he was to be re-elected, a swing against still says, well, some of your policies are on the nose. So do not be afraid to vote outside those major parties to send a message. That's important too.
Thank you. And Shanae?
Yeah, I think the rest of the candidates have really addressed that issue really well. But Thomas, can I just say, it's so nice to see another young person in the room. So it's really nice to see you. Thank you so much. No offense at all. It's no offense, but it's really nice. It's really nice to see someone in my demographic as well, just to be able to be here and feel comfortable to ask a question. Because I'll tell you what, whenever I go around the Hume electorate, a lot of young people keep saying that they don't feel comfortable enough to come forward. So that's why I'm saying it's nice to see.
Living here,
So thank you, Thomas. But yes, do make sure that you vote 1 to 9, And please pass on the message because a lot of young people don't actually know this.
And they think of it as a presidential.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
I'm just giving you any privileges here, sorry.
Sorry, Pascal.
Does anybody else on the panel want to add to that? No, okay. We're supposed to be finished at 8:30. There are a lot of questions that people seem to want to answer. I'll ask the panel if they're happy to take, say, 3 more questions before we start the wind-up. Would you be happy to take 3 more questions, say for 15 minutes? And would you be, you're obviously happy because you're putting your hands up. Okay, we'll go at the, where are you, Bruce? Bruce, the gentleman beside you was here first, and then we'll come to the front, to John.
Hi, my name's David Connon. I live in Mount Annan. It seems that there are more younger and younger people getting involved in politics each day, and if you're leaving it to the younger generations, that you would agree they would have just as much a say as who represents them.
Sorry, question.
So in regards to that, with the voting age, would you consider raising it to,
reducing it?
Reducing it to 16, keeping it at 18, or raising it to 21, which are the options?
Right.
It's for the whole time.
That's the question. Thank you. 16, 18 or 21. Hello. Okay, do you want to start at the other end?
I think that age restrictions are related to the difference between a child and an adult. So it should be the uniform. It shouldn't be this for one thing and this for another thing. The age at which you can put your life in your own hands, however you choose to do it, that's the age that you should be able to vote as well.
As a teacher, and I'm a history teacher too primarily, what's considered mature has changed over time. There was a time when in Australia 21 was when you were considered an adult. So I think there is a case for lowering the voting age as we mature faster and have access to more information.
I think we need to stick with 18 until we have better evidence.
My daughter just turned 18 a couple of months ago, and I still think, I question if she's actually mature enough. So yes, that is the question. I do think she's stayed at 18, but I do contemplate it maybe she should be raised.
I've actually been speaking with 13 and 14-year-olds who are so much more concerned about our current state right now than a lot of others. So I really think that we can bring it down. Of course, just making sure that we make, tick the right boxes and so on. But I really think we can because, just like Greg pointed out, we have access to more information now. So the maturing age is actually a lot lower. So I really think there is scope for that. Yes.
When you were talking about younger people in politics, I thought you were talking about us. I was going to say thank you very much. Not talking about that. Look, I think you're right. I mean, you can drive a car at 17, you can be convicted of murder at 8. There is a good case for reducing the voting age. I don't know what that age will be, but I think it's a good case for it.
The Greens are certainly advocating that we reduce the age to 16. If any of the other candidates have had the privilege to talk to the students from School Strike for Climate, you realise that these people care deeply about their future and concerned that those of us who are voting age aren't making good decisions for them, and that's disappointing. I know my son was 16 when the same-sex marriage postal vote was put out there. Now, in the lead up to that, he and his friends all went and registered on the electoral roll in case they had a chance to give their say on that issue. So that's showing that our kids are engaged.
Having 2 much younger sisters, I think I'm comfortable with it staying at 18 at this stage.
Okay, honestly, John, second last question.
First of all, I want to thank the panel for being very erudite and providing all the responses. You're very diverse, you're very different with some common things, for example.
No, John, sorry, question, please.
Okay, the question is, you are now the Prime Minister. The only way we're going to get at this budget problem of $1 trillion is to increase your income, not cut it. we can't keep cutting taxes. Which are you going to rise, personal or business tax? Yes, no, or both?
Yeah, to start there, you're talking about tax reform and basically, I'm a tax lawyer, and it's a complicated, it's not complicated for you to change the law, that's very simple. It's complicated for people to understand what the laws are, and even the tax office don't understand most of the time. But to increase the amount of tax that's brought in, you need to broaden the base a bit, and I think everyone has said here tonight, we should be looking at the larger corporations, on multinationals, those that aren't paying their fair share of tax in Australia. A lot of work has been done on that, but there's still a lot more work to be done. And I was looking at something, I think it was Google the other day, where I had to answer a question about Google Ireland, and I was in Australia. And I thought, well, this is just typical, isn't it? And I understand how these things work. And we do need to do a lot more work on dragging that money. It's a huge amount of money goes out of Australia to these multinational corporations. And I know how it's done. And there's a vast amount of money
Thanks, Ross.
that can be dragged back in.
Thank you. Anybody else? Gary?
Yes, United Australia Party have a way of creating to make sure we pay the step back without actually raising any taxes. Actually, we want to remove a couple. We want to stop the provisional tax, the tax paid before profits, which is a big one. I like that one very, very much, and abolish the fringe benefits tax. So there's some taxes we can actually remove. At the same time, we can ensure that our resources as Australians pay this debt off, and we have the policies in line with that.
Labor's taking a policy to this election's only real tax policy is to close the loopholes on multinational tax avoidance, and as Fisher and Shooter said, to stopping money being moved overseas, because companies are very clever in moving around their money, and some of them pay less tax than we do, as teachers and nurses, and it's awful. So I think that would be a huge revenue raiser just there.
Thank you. Karen?
I think in paying back the debt, tax is an obvious way, but that's not really where the government can save money even to repay that debt. And I would think that if they were to increase, say, a GST tax overall, that's a very lazy way to look like you're increasing revenue. I think in a free market economy, let's stop subsidising fuel tax companies. If we say that we really need them, they're standing on their own 2 feet, they're not. We're actually supporting that. So I think there's other ways of managing revenue and paying back debt that's not that. And I think we've watched a flattening of the tax rates here in Australia by changing certain things, but we're not changing the amount of deductions. So as a percentage of taxes, someone on a lower income who doesn't have access to the same deductible things due to negative gearing or something like that could end up actually paying overall a higher percentage of tax than someone earning far more than they do. And I think that's got to be looked at. And you mentioned Ross bracket creep, and this goes to that. You either have a flat tax or a marginal tax, but your actual underlying legislation has to match that as well.
Thank you, Karen.
I would say no to both, because I would want us to be looking at alternative ways of reducing the debt. And as I mentioned earlier, cutting those parliamentarian pensions that they all get for the rest of their life after they've left and they've done nothing for us. I'd like to see that as a start, because Australians can't be squeezed anymore. So there's going to be other ways that we can target undeserving people to pay off our debt instead of, again, putting more strain on the Australian people.
Thank you. And last question.
Oh, hi, I'm Joanna from Penrose, where the public transport is even worse than Camden and Bundanoon, trust me. Anthony Albanese last week on Q&A said that he would introduce an Indigenous voice into Parliament before talking about the Republic. How do you feel about this?
So, Republic or Indigenous statement? Let's start at this end. Rebecca?
Yeah, Indigenous. He was saying Indigenous voice first before a Republic.
That's his opinion, yes. Rebecca?
I honestly don't have an issue with Indigenous person being introduced into Parliament.
I wouldn't have thought those things needed to be mutually exclusive. In fact, it would be lovely to see a design incorporate both at once. Personally, I'm certainly in favour of a republic, but I would like to know that the model is one that we can trust and that doesn't have a total buffoon at the helm. I certainly agree with the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and I would love to see that implemented where Indigenous people do form an enormous part, not a token gesture, in the future of our country. I think they have knowledge that we can only dream of having after 60,000 years plus living in Australia. I think that's vital information that could benefit us all.
Anything else? Right?
So Labor does support a referendum on voice to Parliament. I think referendums are very difficult to win, and so Labor plans to do it by trying to make it a bipartisan effort to bring everyone along, because they are very, very difficult to win and a lot of effort goes into it. I think Indigenous Australians have been shortchanged for far too long, and it should be a priority. I am personally a Republican and would love to see a referendum on the Republic as well. But I think our priority should be with our Indigenous people to redress some of the harms that have been done, and that they have done a lot of work leading into that as well. So it's good to honour that work.
Here is another plan that took place and money was spent. Mr Abbott went up and was there when they were talking about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and we haven't moved forward on it. That is disgraceful. It is something that has to happen for our First Nations people. They need that voice to Parliament. It's time we asked them what they needed and really consulted with them before we make decisions. So I heartily support it, and I have signed the pledge to do that. With the Republic, we need to have those discussions. We need to look around and make sure that we have a good referendum around it where the questions are clear and people know what they're voting for.
I've worked directly with a lot of Indigenous peoples throughout my human rights work, and a lot of the time Indigenous people are very much sick and tired of being victimised and not being, sort of having that approach of let's work with them. And I think the approach we need to have is, and I'm a big supporter of the Uluru Statement of the Heart, it's long overdue. I don't know why it's taken this long for us to even have that sort of, let's have everyone involved in. I mean, we call ourselves multicultural and so on, but we fail in that area, we really do. We need greater investment as well. We need to be able to push a lot of our Indigenous peoples and our traditional custodians to take those places, for example, in government and in Parliament. And oftentimes they sort of move away from these things. And these are just from the conversations I'm having. So I'm a full supporter of that. In terms of becoming a republic, I'm 100% supportive of that as well. But I do agree that we need to make sure we have the right checks and balances in place and we're doing it correctly, because once we enter into it, we can't really look back after that.
Thank you. What would that be?
I'm not familiar with the interview, but the way that you've described it, it just sounds like a delay tactic. I think that what we've gone through over the past 2 years has made us never more prepared to have a republic. I don't think that we should be treating people differently. The whole point of a republic is so that you can't vote certain things to certain people, to protect them, to protect minorities. In state health, I see that we're always trying to close the gap. We always have different standards for different types of people. That's never going to work. We're just going to get more and more fractured and keep throwing money into a black hole. Everyone needs to be treated the same, and the republic should reflect that.
Thank you. Ross, you get the last word because you're the lawyer.
Lucky me. Again, part of our policy is the unfair treatment of the Indigenous people in this country, with health and education in particular. And our view is that should be corrected. Everyone should have the same fair go. And as far as, I don't see it as mutually exclusive to deal with the Indigenous question, and Republic's fine. I mean, we probably are due for a republic now. We've been part of the Crown in theory for 200 years. But the time's come now, I think, for a change. And I don't think it'll make much difference to the way we live our life. We have a system now which is very close to a republic anyway. The Queen, the British Parliament, has absolutely nothing to do with what happens in the government here. But we just need to work out Do you elect the president, or is he elected by the parliament? I'm not sure.
Thank you very much. That's, there are more questions, but I'm afraid we have to call an end to it. Could you please thank the extraordinary panel?